In this video, I'll talk about clowns and living sacrifices. When you read the New Testament, the Apostle Paul tells us, that's believers, to make our bodies as living sacrifices. That is the language the Apostle Paul used. Yes, the Apostle Paul was inspired by the Holy Spirit, but just understand the following. He used human language, and human language is culturally constructed. So when he writes a living sacrifice, when we read it today, our interpretation, which is often interpretation of church leaders, because people of church taught us, our idea of a living sacrifice is something noble, something special, something honorable. But understand the following. A sacrifice is something you destroy as a substitute in order to preserve something else. And the idea of sacrifice in ancient times simply meant that the scapegoat was murdered to transfer the rage of the community onto the selected target so that the community could be relieved. That is what crucifixion was about. To crucify someone was really a sex ritual in which you humiliated a man. Often there were men that were crucified, so you humiliate them sexually and you kill them. So he becomes a sacrifice. You get what I'm saying here? So a sacrifice is nothing positive. Even though the community may experience some short-term benefits from sacrificing someone, there is no good thing about sacrifice in itself. And I don't mean investment, okay? Because in the English language, you use the word sacrifice often to imply an investment. For example, if you want to purchase a new car, you go to work every day, work extra hours to order to have the money to buy the car. Then you say you sacrificed time to buy in order to get the car. No, you invest the time in order to get money to buy the car. That's something different. Because what is a living sacrifice? A living sacrifice is a victim that's kept alive by the community, often under the instructions of the community leaders, but the victim is kept in a very bad state on purpose. And at the same time, the community denies that it's the community together keeping that individual in that negative state. Now, the individual, him or herself, may turn negative due to what's happening to her. But that's also the consequence of the persecution of the community. The victim is kept alive, is defenseless. He or she can't defend him or herself. So mentally, they have no protection whatsoever. So all that heaviness and all that rage they get on them will break them down mentally, and soon evil spirits will take over that individual. Why the individual is mentally broken down? They can't be accountable anymore because they can't think well anymore because they have been so mentally abused and trampled upon by the community. And when this happens, that the individual really can't function responsibly anymore, what happens then? Evil spirits begin to use the individual because the community prepared a vessel for the unclean spirits. And now the demons take over the individual. And now the demons begin to act out against the community through that individual. And what happens now is that the community will experience the violence coming from that victim. But here's the thing. They did now perceive the victim as a perpetrator because indeed there's violence coming from the victim. But it's the community that victimized the individual to begin with. It's the denial of the community that enabled it to continue. And now that the individual is mentally dead, the individual is still alive, don't get me wrong, but the individual is mentally dead. He or she can't think anymore. Now the demons just do whatever they can to that individual, and now the community pretends if they are the victim. But when you look at it carefully, it's the community that kept doing dirty to that individual. It's the community that kept it going. It's the community that broke that individual down. It's the community that generated all the negative energy. So they're the ones that attracted those demons and fed those demons to begin with. So now that individual that they are keeping alive in a negative state is completely broken down, the demons say thank you effectively by taking possession of that individual and now working it out on the community. That's the thank you of the demons. the demons are returning their violence onto them. But the community will never take responsibility for their doing because they have so much to lose. So now the victim that the demons now using as a perpetrator, and remember, the individual is completely broken down, so the individual really can't think anymore. It's worse than when someone has a mental retardation in which they think like a child but they're an adult. Here the individual can't think at all. And this is done by the community. This is the violence of the community that broke those people. Now that the demons are using those living victims, now the community needs to justify their fright of the perpetrator. They need to justify it so that nobody would ask any questions. Because if you would look at the whole circumstance, you would realize, hold on a minute, how did this individual turn out so evil just like that? And how can it be that nobody investigates this case? So to prevent people from asking questions, they deify the perpetrator by either putting a comical label on him or her, or by putting a negative label on him or her. Well, it's easy to put a negative label, but negative labels won't work for long. So comical labels will work because the comedy, say the humor, actually deflects the sight of others from seeing what's going on. Now, why am I mentioning this? It's because this is what used to happen in ancient times, even in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, if someone was mentally ill, or when someone was, let me say, the living sacrifice in of the community, they would put someone in a public position in a public space, dress the individual in white, put makeup on the individual, dye their hair color, and the individual will become the spectacle of the community. That's where you get the modern version of the clown. The clown was already known in ancient times among the Romans. There's one played the living sacrifice. But over time, living sacrifices, well, I'm saying this, they began to put makeup on them, to decorate them, and after a while, the whole idea of decorating living sacrifices turned into the celebrity cult. And that, in the 1920s, became the central theme of Hollywood. If you get what I'm saying here. So, that's the history of the clown. Of course, you have let's say the literature history in which people wrote about clowns and all of that. If you want to know about that, you can go to a scholar. I'm a scholar, but I'm not going into the history of clown in literature. I'm talking about the spiritual history behind this thing that we call a clown. Because when you go to the history of it, there's nothing funny about it. When the Apostle Paul wrote to make your bodies as living sacrifices, he was speaking in a metaphorical sense. Paul did not say that we have to become living sacrifices, because Christ doesn't need living sacrifices. He is the ultimate sacrifice to end human violence. And it will end over time. And the process will be completed when Christ returns. Christ has overcome, that victory works out throughout human history until he returns, and then he will establish his rule absolutely forever on the earth. So Christ doesn't need living sacrifices. Who requires living sacrifices? The world. And as a believer, when the world turns on you, you become as the living sacrifice of the world. You're not the Joker, okay? But you may experience life as a Joker because of all the resistance against you. You may have a lot of difficulties finding a job, or finding a mate, or finding friends, or let's say you want to move because the people are in the neighborhood are a mess up in their head, and you see the far better place if you can live, and you really want to move, but you get financial attacks, so you are hindered in moving further. Or it can be that people are having a good time, and you just walk in, people suddenly become upset and angry when you're around. even though you didn't do those people anything. Sometimes you never even met those people before. What's going on? They have unclean spirits attached to them, and those unclean spirits are frightened of you. And those people, they operate in their emotions. So when they feel emotional threat, they give into it without thinking. Now they're responsible for what they're doing, but nevertheless, it's resistance of the paranormal against you. And you experience this. That's also a form of persecution. It's the unclean spirits persecuting you, and they're using people. And there are people themselves persecuting you because they don't want to face themselves. Anyway, when all of this happens, you live life enduring all these tribulations. Of course, you overcome because you walk by faith, but there are going to be moments when you think, Lord, why are you allowing this to happen? That you begin to question, what's wrong with me? Look, the world, to relieve themselves from their own violence, they sacrifice their own. Some of those sacrifices are killed immediately, others are kept alive so that people can have a narcissistic supply for their relief seeking. Yes, just like individual narcissists look for narcissistic supply, collectively the world has this collective need for a collective narcissistic supply for their relief seeking as societies. Because society is a fear construct in which people find relief. And for this fear construct to work, people need to be afraid of something. Because if they're not afraid of something, there won't be any relief for them. And living sacrifices were the victims of the collective violence of society that were broken down so they couldn't help themselves anymore and nobody wanted to help them. And now demons had free access to those individuals. The demons now are using them, and the demons are now haunting that same community that made it possible for those demons to become powerful. That's how you get serial killers and those creepy figures that do a lot of weird stuff. Who emitted all that negative energy? The population did. Who refused to repent? The population. So who fed the demons? The population. Who haunted those victims till they couldn't recover anymore? Society did. So who's responsible for those demons inhabiting those individuals and now haunting the community? The community is. But the community doesn't want to take responsibility. Now they objectify those perpetrators. Now they make them into gods to be frightened of, because that's how society then gets their relief. And in modern times, this living sacrifice thing is portrayed in comic books and in movies and in cartoons. When you look at those superheroes in cartoons and movies, they are living sacrifices. Whether it's Batman, Superman, or Spider-Man, or whatever superhero you take, when you deconstruct the concept that's being presented onto you, you'll find out those are collective victims. But in the modern version, they turn it around and they make the collective victim into a hero, so that you won't realize that those people are really sacrificial victims. That is how pagans cover up for the collective violence of humanity. Because this collective violence is because humankind refuses to acknowledge Christ as Lord. And it's this rage that they vent onto sacrificial victims, where those people are killed directly or they become living sacrifices. And believers are the ones that walk in the power to overcome and overrule this violence that fallen mankind is holding on to. That's why the world hates believers. I'm not saying every worldly individual will hate you, but the world in general hates believers. They'll rather have their serial killers. They'll rather have their sexual deviants or their sex offenders. They'll rather have all of those scum of the earth. Because not all the scum of the earth, but many of them are sacrificial victims that demons are using to haunt the community. Now, I'm not saying that every sex offender or every perpetrator out there or every serial killer is a sacrificial victim. There are people who become reprobates. So they've become evil themselves, and they're doing evil to glorify their father Satan. That happens. So I'm not making excuses here. I'm not making any excuses. I'm just telling you there are people who are really killed mentally by the community, and now the demons have taken over completely. So the real individual is still alive, but he or she is kind of absent. It's really the demons working through that body. But the world rather has such people because they love their sacrificial victims. That's why they enjoy going to movies and watch movies about the sacrificial victims. Now, there are people who don't like movies, but they will feel relief when so-called bad guys are captured on the news or whatever. I'm telling you, open your eyes. That is how this world is. The world rather put up with their sacrificial victims and the reprobates that become extremists, because you have reprobates that become extremists and do a lot of harm, but you also have sacrificial victims. Now, in general, you can't see the difference because both are used by evil spirits to cause harm, a lot of harm. But the moment you see the difference, you also see the collective violence that fallen mankind holding on to. And then the spell is broken because you see through the deception. People don't want this, so they cover it up with movies, with celebrities, and all that, also that entertainment thing. There's nothing wrong with going to a movie, enjoy watching a movie. There's nothing wrong with relaxing by going to a pub or anything like that, okay? There's nothing wrong with relaxation, but the world uses relaxation to blind you from what's really going on. So look, you are not a living sacrifice. No, because Christ is risen. He is Lord. You're born again, so you're in Him. He does not need sacrifices. He doesn't. He doesn't need anyone's energy to feed himself. Demons do. That's why demons require blood sacrifices. God doesn't. The Most High tolerated animal sacrifice in the Old Testament until Christ came. He gave Himself as the sacrifice, and He rose from the dead so that everyone would follow Him and agree with Him. But the world that refuses Christ, they, to relieve themselves of their violence and their rage, they need sacrifices, including living sacrifices. And I'm telling it as it is. One of their victims rose from the dead, that's Christ. In Him there's victory. Well, that being said, I agree with Christ and be at peace.